Have you ever dared to question whether what we call love is sometimes nothing more than fear disguised in romance? What if the desperate need to hold someone close is really just a clever mask to escape the emptiness we fear inside ourselves? And what if, instead of true connection, what we cling to as relationship is simply another way of running from who we really are? The Stoics would say, nothing reveals the truth of our souls more than the silence of solitude. They urged us to imagine ourselves on our deathbed, the room silent, the air heavy, the weight of our choices pressing in. And then to ask the most haunting question of all, did you live your life as your own, or did you merely exist in the shadow of someone else's story? For the Stoics, the greatest tragedy was not loneliness. It was surrendering our inner freedom. And the chains we choose willingly are the most unbreakable of all. We decorate those chains with romance, companionship, and the illusion of being completed. Yet somewhere deep inside, something burns. A whisper tears at you, insisting you were meant for more. If you've ever felt that whisper, if you've ever sensed that beneath the surface of your relationships lies a truth you can't ignore, then this conversation is yours. This is not about rejecting love. It's about having the courage to face yourself without masks, to build a life anchored in strength, sovereignty, and self-respect. Because most people don't fall in love from a place of wholeness. They fall because they are terrified of the silence that greets them when the noise stops. The silence that forces them to hear their own thoughts. The silence that confronts them with questions they've avoided for years. And so, they fill that empty space. Not because they've found someone they truly desire, but because filling the void is easier than facing it. We rarely admit it, but much of what we glorify as love is often just a beautifully dressed form of avoidance. It's easier to disappear into another person's emotions, stories, and needs than to confront our own. As Carl Jung once observed, loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you. And for many, relationships are not bridges to true connection, but shields, ways to pretend they are understood, even when they have never truly understood themselves. The problem is simple, but devastating. When love is rooted in fear, it becomes fragile. Every disagreement feels like a threat. Every absence feels like a crack in the glass. Suddenly, the relationship is carrying an impossible burden, holding together not only two lives, but also the unhealed fractures of two souls. And when those fractures begin to show, panic follows. People cling harder. They trade away their values. They silence their desires. They twist themselves into shapes that never truly fit, just to keep the other person from leaving. But that is not love. That is survival. That is the desperate attempt to keep from being left alone with the very silence they've spent their lives running from. And ironically, in the pursuit of love, the opposite so often happens. We crave validation. We hunger to be accepted, approved, admired. And in the process, without even noticing, we trade away the raw honesty that could have made us grow. This is why so many people lose themselves in relationships without realizing it. The unraveling is subtle, almost invisible at first. You compromise on small things: where to eat, what to watch, how you spend the weekend. It feels harmless, even healthy. It feels like partnership. But slowly, those small concessions multiply. You begin to hold back parts of yourself because you fear they won't understand. You abandon certain dreams because they create tension. You reshape your personality, not because you want to, but because you're terrified that showing your full self might cost you the relationship. And over time, the person you were becomes harder and harder to recognize, even in your own reflection. Marcus Aurelius once warned, "It is not death that a man should fear, but he should fear never beginning to live." That is the quiet tragedy. So many people stop truly living the moment they begin fearing the loss of someone else. When the foundation of love is fear, it strips you of the very thing love is meant to bring: freedom. True love should make you stand taller, not shrink smaller. It should strengthen your individuality, not erase it. But when fear becomes the architect, love is reduced to a fragile contract filled with unspoken conditions. Don't be too much. Don't change too quickly. Don't disturb the balance, even if that balance is suffocating you. People convince themselves this is normal. That compromise at the cost of selfhood is simply the price of being with someone. But the truth is, the cost is far higher than anyone admits. The currency being spent is authenticity, creativity, growth, and all of it is sacrificed in exchange for the comfort of not facing yourself. Here lies the irony. The silence you're running from is not your enemy. It is your teacher. In solitude, the noise dissolves, and you begin to hear your own voice again. At first, it is painful. You hear doubts, regrets, and fears echoing. But if you stay with it long enough, that same silence begins to reveal your values, your calling, your truth. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But you cannot do that if you are constantly drowning in another person's presence, if every thought is shaped to keep the peace rather than to discover your own center." The fear behind love is rarely about losing another person. More often, it's about losing the distraction they provide. Because when you strip away that distraction, you are left with the one figure you cannot escape: yourself. And for many, that is the most terrifying encounter of all. Yet it is also the most transformative. Because once you learn to sit in your own silence without needing to escape it, you stop depending on others to complete you. You stop trading away your identity in the desperate pursuit of belonging. You begin to love by choice, not necessity. And love born from choice, not fear, cannot be broken by absence, distance, or circumstance, because it rests on freedom, not dependency. Choosing to face the silence is not easy. It requires courage to stop reaching for someone else as a shield against yourself. But that courage is the foundation of a life where love becomes a gift, not a crutch. Where being with someone is a deliberate act of creation, not an unconscious escape. Where walking away from what does not serve you is not abandonment, but devotion. Devotion to never abandoning yourself. The fear beneath love keeps us trapped in circles. Facing that fear is what finally sets us free. And freedom, as the Stoics endlessly taught, is the only possession no one can strip from you. But the story we're told about love makes that freedom harder to see. From the moment we're old enough to understand words, the script begins. It arrives in bedtime stories, in movies, in casual conversations between adults. The narrative is always the same. You grow up, you meet someone, you fall in love, and you settle down. It's presented as the final chapter, the perfect ending where all loose ends are tied neatly and the credits roll over a happy conclusion. Yet almost no one asks, what happens after the screen fades to black? And even fewer dare to question whether this story actually serves us, or whether it quietly robs us of the chance to meet the most important person we'll ever know, ourselves. This conditioning doesn't storm into our lives like a command. It seeps in softly, insidiously. It hides in the well-meaning questions from relatives. When are you going to meet someone? As if life is nothing more than a waiting room for love. It hides in compliments that compare our worth to our relationship status. By adulthood, the message has become so ingrained, it is no longer questioned. It is absorbed as silently as gravity. And the effect of this quiet programming is profound. Without realizing it, countless people grow into adults who believe that life without a partner is automatically incomplete. They may travel, build careers, accumulate experiences. Yet in the back of their mind, an unspoken reminder lingers. This is all filler until you find someone. And so, they enter relationships not from readiness or self-knowledge, but from obedience to the script they were handed. Carl Jung once wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." For many, relationships become the perfect way to avoid that terrifying work. If someone else validates us, we no longer have to validate ourselves. If someone else reflects our worth back to us, we no longer have to face the silence that demands we define it for ourselves. This invisible conditioning shapes not only who we choose, but how we behave once we've chosen. If you were taught that your worth is tied to being partnered, you will endure situations that harm you rather than risk the label of being single. You will ignore red flags, tolerate disrespect, or twist yourself into the image of someone else's ideal, all to avoid the shame of being alone. Marcus Aurelius observed, "It is not the things themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about them." And here lies the most destructive judgment of all. Alone equals failure. Together equals success. This false equation keeps countless people trapped in lives that do not reflect who they truly are. It's worth pausing to notice something important. The cultural script we inherit doesn't account for individuality. It's a one-size-fits-all story, yet it's sold to us as universal truth. Some people flourish in deep, lifelong partnerships. Others require long stretches of solitude to truly grow into themselves. But this conditioning leaves almost no space for the second option. Solitude is recast as loneliness, and loneliness is portrayed as a problem to be solved quickly, as if being with yourself is somehow unnatural. And soon that pressure doesn't just come from society. It takes up residence inside you. Even when no one is watching, you feel restless in your own company, as if time spent alone is wasted because you're not moving closer to that prescribed ending. Over time, this restlessness becomes the background music of your life. You begin to measure your progress not by how deeply you've come to know yourself, but by how close you are to fulfilling the cultural blueprint. The danger in living by this blueprint is that it discourages self-exploration. If the destination has already been set for you, why bother questioning whether it fits who you've become? Why wander off the path to see if there's a truer way forward? The script whispers that discovering yourself is secondary, that the real goal is finding someone else. And in surrendering to that whisper, you quietly abandon pieces of yourself. Ambitions, interests, unconventional ideas that don't neatly fit the role of partner. Slowly, the story doesn't just shape your relationships, it reshapes your identity. Carl Jung spoke often of individuation, the lifelong process of becoming your true self, as the central task of existence. This journey demands time, space, and the willingness to stand apart from the crowd. Yet the invisible conditioning pushes in the opposite direction. Merge quickly, pair off, bind yourself to another before you've even met yourself. And here lies the quiet tension. Individuation pulls you inward, while the cultural script drags you outward. Without realizing it, decades can slip away in this tug of war. The gravitational pull of expectation, pulling you further from your own becoming. The truth is, love or companionship isn't the problem. The problem is when it becomes compulsory, when it's pursued reflexively, without asking whether you are ready or whether the self you're becoming is even compatible with the role you've been told to play. Relationships entered under the weight of conditioning often become reflections of that conditioning. Safe, familiar, but unchallenging. You may find comfort, yes, but rarely the full truth of yourself. And the tragedy is that by the time you notice, years may have passed, and the person you could have been feels distant, almost unreachable. The first step to breaking this spell is awareness. To see the script for what it really is, a story, not a law, is to unlock freedom. When you recognize you are free to write your own script, the urgency to find someone begins to dissolve. Singleness stops being an absence and becomes an open field, fertile ground for planting ideas, dreams, and aspects of yourself that could never grow in the cramped soil of living only for approval. The Stoics would call this living in accordance with nature, not society's nature, but your own. Breaking free from conditioning doesn't mean rejecting love. It means refusing to let the fear of being alone dictate the course of your life. It means choosing to know yourself fully before you choose to share yourself. Because when you meet another from a place of wholeness, you won't be looking to them to patch your wounds or fill a void. You'll simply be inviting them to walk beside you on a path that is already your own. And that kind of bond cannot be manufactured by culture, because it is born of freedom, not fear. But this transformation doesn't happen all at once. It doesn't strike like lightning in a single moment you can point to. It creeps in slowly, almost invisibly. It starts with one tiny compromise. You skip something you wanted to do because it doesn't fit the plan. You soften your opinion in conversation to avoid friction. You tell yourself this is what maturity looks like, that love means meeting in the middle. And at first, it feels noble. But slowly, piece by piece, you hand over fragments of yourself. The shift is so subtle, you barely notice it. You adapt to keep the peace, to protect the bond you're terrified of losing. But while compromise is part of connection, there is a difference between adapting and erasing. When you filter your thoughts before speaking, when you swallow desires, because they might unsettle, you begin trading authenticity for security. And the Stoics warned against this kind of bargain. Seneca wrote, "He who is brave is free." True freedom means living unedited, not constantly rehearsing your lines on the stage of love. But when fear is the director, freedom slips out the back door. The danger is that this quiet disappearance often disguises itself as growth. You tell yourself you're becoming less selfish, more flexible, more understanding, and sometimes you are. But there's a thin line between growth and shrinking. And when the line blurs, you don't notice which side you're on until it's already behind you. Eventually, you begin to feel the erosion. You laugh less in the way you once did. You pursue fewer of the passions that once made you alive. You hesitate before speaking your truth. None of these seem alarming in isolation, but together they create a hollowing, a self sanded down to fit the smooth shape of someone else's comfort. And what makes this erosion dangerous is that it's almost always self-inflicted. Rarely does someone demand that you disappear. Instead, you do it quietly, believing that love is maintained by dulling your edges, by being agreeable even when it costs something essential. Over months or years, the reflection staring back at you feels familiar but strangely distant. The outline remains, but the inner fire, the thoughts, desires, expressions that made you you, has dimmed. And this erosion isn't limited to romance. It happens in families, friendships, workplaces. Anywhere the pressure to belong outweighs the courage to stand as yourself. Because it unfolds gradually, it feels natural, even inevitable. You tell yourself everyone compromises, that maybe this is just the price of connection. But beneath it all, a quiet restlessness stirs. It is the memory of a time when you lived fully in your own skin, unedited, unapologetic. And the painful truth is this: disappearing does not strengthen bonds, it weakens them. Relationships built on partial selves and filtered truths cannot hold deep roots. On the surface there is peace, but beneath, resentment festers. The connection becomes less about genuine closeness and more about maintaining an image. Marcus Aurelius once reminded us, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." If your thoughts are always tailored to avoid conflict, your soul slowly fades into the muted tones of avoidance. You lose the vibrant colors that made you irreplaceable. Reclaiming yourself does not mean rejecting compromise altogether. It means remembering that true love, whether romantic, platonic, or even self-love, thrives only when both people stand whole. It means remembering that kindness does not require the erasure of boundaries, and that love does not require the silencing of truth. The courage to be fully yourself will sometimes create tension, but tension is not the enemy. The Stoics understood that difficulty is the training ground for strength. A relationship that collapses under the weight of your authenticity is not one that could ever hold you. The slow disappearance is seductive because it feels safe. But that safety is an illusion if it comes at the expense of your life force. You were not meant to be a palatable, softened version of yourself just to preserve the appearance of love. Love that requires your absence is not love at all. It is a contract of quiet self-abandonment. And when you finally see this truth, you realize the greatest gift you can give to any relationship is not half of yourself, but the fullness of who you are, uncut, unmasked, and unafraid. Because the moment you stop disappearing, you stop trading your one brief life for the comfort of someone else's expectations, and you begin to live as nature intended, whole, present, and unmistakably your own. Belonging is one of the deepest human impulses. From birth, we are wired to seek it, to feel anchored in a group, a community, a relationship. There is safety in knowing you have a place to return to, someone who calls you theirs, a life that feels shared rather than solitary. Yet the Stoics would caution us to examine the hidden cost of such belonging. For when belonging is not rooted in freedom, it often erodes the very self that seeks it. The toll is not demanded in one dramatic blow. It is paid silently, in small, repeated compromises of your essence. That cost is almost never asked for openly. Instead, it creeps in as an invisible bargain, a long negotiation of your thoughts, your words, your ambitions, even your joys. Over time, you learn which parts of yourself win approval and which provoke disapproval. And slowly, those disapproved parts are tucked away. You begin to hide your edges, to dim your spark, to silence your inconvenient truths. And the irony is that the more of yourself you surrender, the safer you appear to feel, yet the weaker your inner foundation becomes. The safety of belonging is often wrapped in rules rarely spoken but always enforced. Without noticing, you absorb them into your daily rhythm. You discover that certain opinions are better swallowed because they disturb the calm surface. Ambitions must be trimmed back lest they disrupt the balance. Even emotions, those raw, unfiltered messengers of the soul, are measured and diluted so they won't make others uneasy. Bit by bit, you find yourself living in a muted middle ground, never too much, never too little, always carefully adjusted to keep peace. And yet, Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily, if you seek tranquility, do not seek it in the approval of others. It is found within. Tranquility born from compromise is not tranquility at all. It is quiet suffocation. Epictetus urged his students, if you wish to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. But belonging conditions us to avoid this discomfort. We trade truth for smoothness, honesty for acceptance, and repeated often enough, these trades reshape us. The mask once put on for convenience becomes fused to the face. One day you look in the mirror and realize you no longer know where the performance ends and the person begins. What looks like maturity is often retreat. What looks like harmony is often self-erasure. The danger is subtle precisely because it feels like love. You reassure yourself, I compromise because I care, because I value this bond. And sometimes that is true. But the line between healthy compromise and self-abandonment is razor thin, and belonging has a way of nudging you across that line without notice. Until eventually, you find yourself withholding thoughts unless they are safe, shelving dreams that do not align with the collective script, tempering your joy so it will not outshine the room. You become careful, measured, predictable, not because you wanted to, but because unpredictability threatened the fragile approval you worked so hard to secure. The cost of belonging is rarely paid in betrayals or grand sacrifices. It is paid in tiny, near invisible installments. The joke you did not tell because you feared how it would land. The truth you did not speak because it might spark conflict. The risk you avoided because explaining yourself to another felt exhausting. None of these are catastrophic in isolation, but accumulated across years, they become a pattern of slow self-betrayal. As Seneca warned, life is very short and anxious for those who forget the past, neglect the present, and fear the future. The anxiety of belonging is precisely this: neglect of your own present clarity in order to cling to borrowed security. And so, without realizing it, you begin to live, not for your authenticity, but for the stability of others. You trade individuality for approval, believing that the more you sacrifice, the deeper your roots will sink. Yet the arithmetic of the soul is different. The more you surrender, the paler you become. A soul constantly trimmed to fit expectations loses its own distinct color. What once burned brightly becomes a muted echo. What was uniquely yours becomes a borrowed shape. This is why choosing solitude, even briefly, is an act of profound freedom. To stay single, or to step back into silence, is not rejection of love, but reclamation of sovereignty. It is the refusal to measure every decision by how it will be received. It is the courage to stand before yourself without the cushion of constant approval. The Stoics called this self-government. You have power over your mind, Marcus wrote, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. To claim that strength is to anchor your choices in reason and nature, not in the shifting winds of other people's judgments. This is not to vilify connection. Love, friendship, community, these can be sources of immense joy and growth. But they only serve the soul when they allow your full presence. When belonging demands continual self-editing, it ceases to be connection and becomes control. And control, however gentle, distorts your nature. Jung observed that individuation, the task of becoming whole, cannot occur if your sense of self is dependent on external approval. The parts you hide to maintain belonging remain fragmented, waiting for the courage of exposure. To choose yourself over the comfort of belonging is a trial of the spirit. It means standing apart from the crowd, defying unwritten rules, perhaps severing ties with relationships too fragile to endure your truth. It may mean nights of loneliness sharper than you imagined, but it also means living without constant erosion, without the drip, drip, drip of compromise wearing away your core. And in that freedom, something extraordinary happens. You belong to yourself, utterly and without condition. That is the bedrock upon which any true connection can rest. The cost of belonging is undeniable, but the reward of sovereignty is greater still. To remain single or to embrace solitude is not to reject intimacy. It is to refuse the bargain of self-erasure. It means that when you finally choose to belong somewhere, it will be with your entire self intact. No shrinking, no disguising, no dulling. For belonging is sweetest when it does not demand your disappearance. Freedom, once claimed, transforms every connection. It turns companionship from dependence into resonance. And then, when you strip away the ceaseless hum of other voices, something unexpected arises. At first, the silence feels deafening, like a drumbeat in an empty hall. Thoughts you had buried resurface. Ideas long suppressed return with sharpness. With no distractions, your inner landscape expands. Jung wrote, "Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes." Solitude is that awakening. It drags into the light what you have avoided. And though the light may sting, it reveals clarity you could never find while endlessly adjusting yourself to others. At first, solitude tastes like loss. No partner to echo your words, no one to validate each decision, no audience for your daily story. But that loss is an illusion. What you have been given is space, open, unclaimed, immeasurable space. And space has a strange power. It reveals truth. Marcus wrote, "Look well into yourself. There is a source of strength which will always spring up if you will always look." In solitude, that spring becomes visible. Validation no longer comes from outside, it flows from within. The more you dwell in this space, the more it reshapes you. At first, you fill the silence with distractions, music, screens, chatter, but over time, you allow silence to simply be. In that stillness, you meet yourself again. Desires sharpen, dreams once abandoned call out. You distinguish between what is truly yours and what was inherited from others. And when you answer those calls, solitude shifts from heavy to empowering. Not because you reject people, but because you have tasted the sovereignty of living without compromise. This chosen solitude carries a unique energy. It is not exile nor isolation born of rejection. It is deliberate, grounded in self-respect, aligned with nature's rhythm. The Stoics would call it living in accordance with reason, directing your energy toward creation rather than reaction. You no longer bend to moods or plans not your own. You no longer dilute your joy to match the room. Time itself feels different, stretched, open, vast. You pursue an idea until it ripens. You follow inspiration at midnight without explanation. You reclaim the immense energy once spent maintaining fragile harmony and reinvest it into what truly matters. Of course, solitude is not endless inspiration. There are days when the silence feels weighty, when you long for the warmth of effortless companionship. But even this heaviness is not without meaning. It is the weight of becoming. The Stoics taught that discomfort is not an enemy, but a trainer, a forge. In carrying the burden of solitude, you are tempered into strength. And that strength, once earned, is yours forever. It is in solitude that you are being forged, tempered, and strengthened, like iron in the fire. Solitude shapes your capacity to stand alone, to sit with the full weight of your own mind without fleeing from it. At first, the emptiness may feel threatening, a void demanding confrontation. But gradually, the space solitude creates ceases to feel like absence and instead becomes home, a fertile ground where thought sharpens, vision clears, and desires are recognized in their purest form. The Stoics called this inner sanctuary the citadel of the mind. Within it, clarity grows. Once you have felt the precision of your own thinking and the unfiltered pull of your deepest intentions, you protect that ground fiercely, not as a barrier from the world, but as the foundation on which you stand, steady and unshakable. For when you belong fully to yourself, no connection can undo that, and no absence can diminish it. From our earliest stories, culture tells us a persistent myth. Somewhere, beyond the horizon of our own lives, exists another person who will complete us. Fairy tales, songs, movies, all perpetuate the idea that wholeness lies in union. At first, this notion feels romantic, even comforting. It promises that the deepest fulfillment comes not from cultivating your own soul, but from merging with another. Beneath that comforting surface, however, hides a subtle and dangerous belief that alone you are incomplete. Accepting this belief quietly reshapes your life. Every action becomes a calculation. Will this attract or retain another? Will it please or threaten? Your ambitions are measured, your personality adjusted, and the contours of your identity reshaped to serve the myth. This is not love. It is dependence masquerading as devotion. Dependence seduces because it offers the illusion of safety. As long as the relationship persists, you are secure. Yet this security is false, for it demands a subtle surrender. You begin to measure yourself not by your own standards, but by how well you integrate into someone else's existence. Inner signals, curiosity, desire, intuition are ignored because acting on them may disrupt the bond. Epictetus warned, "If you want to be free, then wish for nothing that depends on others." Freedom cannot flourish in dependence. It contracts quietly, until one day you discover your life rests on shifting ground. When the myth of incompleteness dominates, relationships cease to be choices and become lifelines. Losing the other person does not just signify pain. It feels like the collapse of your own being. That is why many endure situations that no longer nourish them, silencing instincts, dismissing needs. But the truth is stark and liberating. You were never half of a whole. You were always a complete being, capable of love, creation, and purpose independently. Wholeness cannot be borrowed. It is cultivated within. Ask yourself, where did the belief in incompleteness originate? Culture provides many answers. Societies idealize the couple, the nuclear family, presenting them as the apex of achievement. Single life is framed as provisional, a waiting room to escape from. Even language betrays this bias. To settle down implies completion only comes through partnership. Yet the reality is different. Partnership is not a guarantee of fulfillment, and singleness is not a void. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, "Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself." The myth of incompleteness conceals this truth, diverting attention outward when the essential work is inward. To break free from this myth is not to reject connection, but to approach it from self-sufficiency. When you no longer see yourself as a fragment awaiting completion, love becomes a choice, not a need. You can give without losing yourself, receive without making it your source of identity. This form of love, shared between two whole individuals, is richer, deeper, and enduring. Jung understood this principle. True connection emerges only when both participants confront their inner world rather than using each other as a shield from it. Choosing wholeness can be uncomfortable. Facing your own flaws, strengths, and unrealized potential without the immediate validation of a partner is daunting. Most evade this work, which is why dependence is tempting. But once you build a life complete on its own terms, the fear of being alone fades. Self-worth ceases to fluctuate with the moods or judgments of others. Relationships formed from this foundation are not attempts to fill a void, they are expressions of shared abundance. The myth of incompleteness is powerful because repetition makes it feel true. Yet the reality is simple and liberating. You are whole. You are a complex, capable being. Living from this place restores individuality, diminishes dependence, and reframes love as complement, not crutch. Life ceases to be a search for missing pieces. It becomes the creation of something complete, entirely on your terms. Society signals its preferences subtly. Milestones like buying a home, marrying, or having children are celebrated as markers of success. These scripts offer predictability, which comforts the collective. A coupled life is easy to understand, categorize, and control. Step outside the pattern. Live fully and unapologetically single, and suddenly your path becomes less predictable. That unpredictability can unsettle others because it signals autonomy, the ultimate form of freedom. The thriving single person does not merely survive alone, they flourish. They move according to their own rhythm, make choices without consensus, and pursue opportunities that serve their vision, not a shared script. Autonomy is power. If no one can anticipate your next step, it means you are not following another's map. You are authoring your own. The herd may see this as instability, but for the outlier, it is liberation. You pivot on inspiration, take risks without justification, and chase paths invisible to the majority. The herd resists. Questions arise, veiled as concern. Don't you want someone to share your life? Aren't you afraid of ending up alone? These are assumptions of incompleteness, designed to reinforce conformity. But solitude, when chosen deliberately, is no lack. It is a rare luxury, a vast arena for self-determination to flourish uninterrupted. The thriving single person understands this, and knowledge becomes a shield against subtle societal pressures. What unsettles the collective is not solitude itself, but contentment within it. Alone and miserable validates the myth. Alone and thriving disrupts it. It demonstrates that fulfillment does not require a partner, challenging everyone who has surrendered pieces of themselves. Jung recognized this dynamic. Enduring conflict, and emerging from it produces an inner calm the untested cannot mimic. The thriving single person has confronted expectation, embraced freedom, and cultivated a resilience the herd cannot replicate. Unpredictability breeds resilience. It sharpens judgment, hones intuition, and strengthens the capacity to act decisively. In this state, life is not dictated by scripts, expectations, or dependence. It is fully, unapologetically yours. When you no longer depend on another person to define your identity, your equilibrium becomes anchored in yourself, rather than in the shifting sands of external approval. The herd fears disruption because it threatens the carefully constructed architecture of their stability. Yet the outlier moves through change with fluidity, accustomed to navigating life without a preset map. They recognize that circumstances can shift in an instant, and they have forged themselves to respond with resilience, adaptability, and poise. This adaptability is a rare form of power, a cultivated strength that allows one to seize opportunities, endure trials, and remain intact amid upheaval. Ultimately, the distinction between the herd and the outlier is not rooted in relationships but in agency. The herd follows paths preordained by convention, seeking security in numbers, while the outlier embraces the calculated risk of stepping away from these paths, acknowledging that the terrain may be unpredictable, yet fully owned and explored. By embracing that risk, the outlier secures something the herd often sacrifices: the unshakable right to live entirely on their own terms. The thriving single individual understands that unpredictability is not chaos. It is potential. It is the openness to be molded by choice rather than by default. This person is not rejecting connection. They are rejecting the notion that connection requires surrendering individuality. In a world that rewards predictability, the outlier's refusal to be easily defined becomes both a quiet rebellion and an explicit declaration. I belong to myself first. Such self-possession cannot be bestowed, nor can it be taken. It must be built, earned, and zealously safeguarded. Once it is attained, one realizes that this is the rarest kind of power. The most profound ideas rarely emerge amidst noise. They do not take shape in rooms crowded with chatter, obligations, and the gravitational pull of other people's expectations. They manifest in the still hours when the world recedes and attention is undistracted. There is an electricity in those moments, the long nights consumed by thought, the quiet mornings unburdened by obligation. In solitude, the mind wanders freely, traversing uncharted territories, making connections impossible under the gaze of an audience. Carl Jung captured this when he said, "Solitude is for me a fountain of healing which makes my life worth living." He recognized that creation requires space. Without it, thought cannot fully manifest. Alone, you pursue ideas without the need for justification. You follow a thought into the depths of obsession, hours or days consumed entirely by exploration, without explanation or apology. No one dictates pace or interruptions. The freedom to immerse fully in your own process is a rare gift in a world enthralled by constant connection. This liberty sharpens the creative edge. Without compromise or subtle pressures to accommodate others, the mind stretches in ways impossible within crowds. Crowded spaces, whether physical or emotional, draw attention outward. Awareness of others' expectations can facilitate collaboration, but stifles certain forms of thought. The unruly, the unmeasured, the untouched by influence. Solitude removes the need for external validation. Creation becomes an imperative, not a performance. Seneca reminded us, we must take a break from the world and withdraw into ourselves. It is not withdrawal out of avoidance, but an act of preservation to protect the fragile beginnings of an idea until it is ready to face the world. This absence of expectation transforms solitude into fertile ground. When no one waits for a predetermined outcome, exploration of the strange, the impractical, the absurd becomes possible. Here, originality flourishes. You may produce work unseen, unrecognized, unbound by the judgment of others. Mistakes are not failures but necessary experiments. Without the constant lens of opinion, risk-taking becomes attainable. A rhythm emerges, conducive to flow, a state in which time disappears, attention is absorbed fully, and the work proceeds uninterrupted. No need to respond to messages or justify presence. Momentum builds, drawing you deeper. Sometimes, the results born of such immersion could never have been forced by will alone. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Nowhere you can go is more peaceful, more free of interruptions than your own soul." Within this uninterrupted space, the highest, quality work often finds you. The creative power of solitude is not measured by output, but by authenticity. Uninfluenced, the mind ceases mimicry, ceases editing prematurely, and produces raw, unfiltered work that bears your signature. Even if imperfect, it carries a distinctiveness unattainable under constant oversight. This is why thinkers, writers, and artists throughout history sought solitude, not as rejection, but as essential fuel for their craft. Collaboration has its place, yet the deepest, transformative insights often arise in quiet hours, unseen and uninterrupted. Alone, one wrestles with personal contradictions, pushes limits, and listens for subtle truths lost amidst crowds. These truths may initially unsettle, but they reshape creation at its root. The creative edge of solitude allows you to hear yourself without dilution, to build before the world imposes expectations. Once experienced, this space becomes sacred. Guarded fiercely, it is not a retreat from life, but a defense of vitality. The freedom to create untainted by others' demands strengthens every aspect of being. Stepping away from constant emotional exchange brings another revelation. Initially disorienting, it exposes how much of prior feeling was entangled in managing another. Habitually, you have monitored others' emotional currents, adjusting tone, energy, and words to maintain equilibrium. Removing that negotiation clears the static. You perceive which emotions are truly yours. Irritation, heaviness, and unease, previously attributed to your own selfhood, are recognized as residues of others' influence. The Stoics teach that peace of mind derives not from events themselves, but from the judgments we attach to them. In solitude, judgments are unfiltered, unshaped by external lenses. This clarity can feel sharp, almost overwhelming. No longer does someone mediate your experience. You are left to encounter feelings fully. Gradually, you hear what excites you without pretense, what frustrates you without avoidance. The emotional landscape transitions from shared terrain to personal territory, allowing you to inhabit your mind and heart fully, guided by your own discernment. This is where the true emotional detox begins. Freed from the constant influx of another person's moods, needs, and unspoken expectations, your nervous system finally begins to settle. You stop waking each day braced for unforeseen emotional turbulence. You no longer rehearse conversations in your mind before they occur, questioning every word and tone. Should I say this? Will this upset them? Do I need to intervene before it escalates? The space left behind is not a void, it is breathable. It carries your own rhythm, your own pace, your own equilibrium. Emotional independence does not signify a lack of care for others. Rather, it marks the cessation of carrying them in ways that exact a cost to yourself. In solitude, you first learn to communicate with your own inner self. You validate your emotions without waiting for external acknowledgement. You grant yourself permission to feel fully, without editing your experience to fit someone else's comfort. And when you re-engage with others, you do so from a grounded place rather than one of entanglement. One of the most profound transformations occurs in the nature of joy. When entwined with another's emotional currents, your happiness is never purely yours. It is either amplified by their delight or diminished by their despair. Alone, your joy becomes self-generated, stable, and resilient against the storms of others. You begin noticing subtleties once relegated to background noise, the way morning light spills across your kitchen, the cadence of your own laughter at humor only you appreciate, the deep calm of inhabiting your own space. This emotional detox is not without discomfort. The absence of another's presence can initially feel like emptiness. There may be a pull to re-engage with old entanglements, simply to feel the familiar currents of another's emotion. Yet, if you resist the urge to fill that silence hastily, you discover that the emptiness was never emptiness at all. It was space, a space waiting to be reclaimed by you, a space in which your own voice, long overshadowed, begins to speak freely once more. Ultimately, Solitude's detox is less about removing others from your life and more about clearing the haze they inadvertently create around your inner world. It is the act of standing fully at the center of your own emotional weather, unshaken by external storms. Once you experience this clarity, once you feel the quiet strength of owning every emotion that passes through you, protecting it becomes non-negotiable. In that clarity, you do not merely hear yourself, you recognize yourself. And that recognition marks the beginning of everything. Living on your own terms, free from reliance on a partner or the validation of a group, will provoke labels: lonely, selfish, incomplete. These words are not about you, they reflect the discomfort your independence awakens in others. Stepping outside the collective script unsettles those accustomed to conformity. The system thrives on dependence because dependent individuals are easier to manage, easier to guide, easier to contain. If your identity rests on another's approval or a group's expectations, you will protect it at all costs, even at the expense of your truth. Dependence maintains control. Independence disrupts it. When you no longer require external validation to feel whole, you become unpredictable. Your choices are no longer dictated by fear of judgment, abandonment, or exclusion. That unpredictability unsettles the system. Independence is often mislabeled to reinforce conformity. It is called loneliness because fulfillment outside constant companionship seems unimaginable. It is called selfishness because prioritizing your own path threatens the comfort of the collective. It is called incompleteness because the observer's idea of wholeness depends on another. These labels act as social mechanisms to enforce obedience. If independence is framed as undesirable, fewer will pursue it. If staying single is stigmatized, individuals rush to couple, often silencing authentic aspects of themselves to fit the mold. The radical act of living free is more than personal. It defies the system's subtle dominion. Independence threatens because it proves you can live without constant external validation. You do not need someone else to define your identity, legitimize your choices, or fill a void. This is not rejection of love or connection. It is the removal of need from the equation. Love freely given, without dependence, is purer and stronger. But attaining this requires standing firmly on your own. Such freedom is not without its burdens. There will be days when the weight of complete responsibility for your life feels heavier than anticipated. No one else bears the blame for your failures. No one else claims credit for your successes. You own it all. And this is precisely why the freedom matters. Freedom without ownership is merely another form of dependence masquerading as choice. People. often fear what they secretly desire. Those who criticize your independence are often those who wish they possessed the courage to claim their own. Your example forces them to confront the compromises they have accepted. It is easier for them to dismiss you than to reckon with the possibility that they settled for less than they truly wanted. Standing in your freedom is not only a personal choice, it is an unspoken challenge to those around you. When they call you lonely, remember? Solitude is a source of strength. When they call you selfish, remember, self-respect is the foundation of all meaningful connections. When they call you incomplete, remember, wholeness does not come from external addition, but from what you refuse to surrender. The system thrives on dependence, yet your life does not have to. The mislabeling loses weight once seen for what it truly is, a signal that you have stepped beyond the boundaries others cling to for safety. Beyond those boundaries lies a vast expanse, far greater than you were ever led to believe. Sovereignty is never stumbled upon, it is earned, and the price is never trivial. To claim it, you must relinquish what most cling to as proof of a good life. Shared plans that offer guidance, familiar paths that provide comfort, and all the expectations meant to anchor you to the collective. The automatic affection that reassures you without effort. The built-in companionship that makes weekends and holidays feel less hollow. These comforts are warm, familiar, and alluring, but they come with strings, subtle, almost invisible strings that quietly pull you away from yourself. To step fully into sovereignty is to cut some of those strings, and that is a choice few make, because it demands relinquishing a comfort that feels too pleasurable to forfeit. In solitude, there is no one to validate your choices, no one to veto them. Every decision rests solely in your hands. That freedom can feel intoxicating and terrifying simultaneously. There is no one to share the weight when a choice misfires, no one to split the blame, no one to soften the consequence. Yet there is also no one to restrain you when your instincts are sharp and your vision is clear. Sovereignty is the ownership of all outcomes, both victories and mistakes, with the same steady acceptance. You cease outsourcing responsibility for your life. You begin carrying it entirely yourself. The Stoics grasp this profoundly. Epictetus wrote, "No man is free who is not master of himself." Solitude is the training ground for that mastery. The cost of sovereignty is not measured in tangible comforts alone. You pay in moments of doubt, in nights when silence feels heavier than you imagined, in mornings when you wish someone were beside you to share the small joys. Sovereignty can feel lonely, not because people are absent, but because you have chosen not to rely on them to steady yourself. You learn to be your own anchor, to generate your own reassurance, to sit with discomfort rather than reaching for a quick fix in someone else's presence. This skill, holding your ground without external props, becomes one of your greatest strengths. The beauty of sovereignty transforms every connection you choose to maintain. Relationships are no longer attempts to fill a void. They become deliberate, choices made from abundance, not necessity. You no longer ask someone to complete you or rescue you from yourself. You invite them to walk beside you because you desire it, not because you require it. Jung often spoke of individuation, the process of becoming whole within oneself. Sovereignty is the lived manifestation of that wholeness. You can love deeply without fearing that losing another will cause you to lose yourself. Yet the world rarely nurtures such self-rule. It thrives on mutual reliance, on the predictability of interdependence. A sovereign individual cannot be as easily managed or persuaded. You are less likely to accept what conflicts with your values, less willing to remain in circumstances that inhibit your growth. That can make you difficult for those who prefer comfort over truth. Some relationships may fade, built as they were on your willingness to compromise parts of yourself to maintain harmony. Sovereignty permits no such self-erasure. The price also includes confronting yourself without distraction. There is no one to blame when you fail. no one to hide behind when you avoid the hard work. You see yourself fully, flaws, blind spots, excuses, and in that clarity, you have two paths: change or accept the truth of who you are without evasion. Both are challenging, yet either advances you toward the freedom most speak of, but few attain. The reward for paying this price is a life unmistakably your own. Every decision, every achievement, every mistake carries your signature. You navigate the world without deluding yourself for acceptance or bending into forms dictated by others' expectations. Your time is yours. Your energy is yours. Your mind is yours. Life does not become easier. It becomes authentically yours in a manner no one can claim or take away. Once you have lived in this truth, having authored each choice for months or years, it is nearly impossible to relinquish it. The allure of shared plans or automatic affection will always whisper, but it cannot outweigh the quiet, enduring power of complete self-possession. That is the price of sovereignty, and the reason it is worth paying. There comes a point in solitude when a shift occurs. At first, being alone may feel like a space to fill, a room too quiet, a life missing familiar sounds. You may glance at your phone, not from a desire to communicate, but from a hope someone will remind you that you matter. Solitude tests you. It exposes every crack, every place where you leaned on another to hold your life together. Yet, if you remain, resisting the pull of familiar comfort or validation, something remarkable emerges. The silence ceases to feel punitive. It becomes a source of strength you never realized you possessed. Transformation is gradual, subtle at first. You awaken one morning to find the compulsion to check in with someone before acting has dissipated. Doubt no longer requires external reassurance. You have learned to steady yourself. This is the quiet power of independence. Unheralded, unflashy, but unshakable. You have ceased outsourcing your stability. In doing so, you reclaim a freedom most never know. The Stoics understood this deeply. Epictetus taught that freedom arises when you control your own mind and desires, when you cease to rely on externals to achieve peace. There is a profound calm in knowing you can navigate life without leaning on someone else's emotional scaffolding. You have endured nights of doubt, questioned your capacity to stand alone, and emerged not unscathed but unbroken. The quiet is no longer frightening. Your own voice has become louder, clearer, and more reliable than the noise of outside opinions. This transformation reshapes your relationships, not by pushing people away, but by redefining why they are in your life. When you no longer seek someone to complete you, you begin choosing those who expand you. Love, friendship, connection. These cease to be about filling a void and become about sharing abundance. Jung observed that genuine connection arises only between two whole individuals, each accountable for their own growth. Having met yourself fully, you can finally meet others without the weight of unspoken dependency. Of course, this unshakable self is not without vulnerability. You still feel pain, disappointment, and longing, but they no longer destabilize you. Loss no longer carries the same terror, because you know that even in absence, you cannot lose yourself. You have been alone before and survived. You have sat in silence and discovered not emptiness, but a rich inner life no one else could give. Carrying this knowledge changes how you move through the world. There is a profound humility in this stage. Self-reliance does not mean isolation. You can accept help without losing your footing. You can love without fear that your foundation will crumble. People may come and go, but your ground remains steady, because it is built not on their presence, but on yourself. This is the paradox of true freedom. The more fully you belong to yourself, the more freely you can give to others. Perhaps the most remarkable change is in your perception of time. You no longer rush to fill days merely to escape solitude. You savor moments that once went unnoticed: the walk at dusk, the quiet meal, an evening with a book. They are no longer placeholders between grand events. They are the life itself. In meeting this version of yourself, you realize you were never incomplete. The self you sought externally was always present, hidden beneath noise, distraction, and dependence. Now, stripped of these layers, you see clearly a self that is whole, steady, and fully alive. That is the moment you become unshakable. And once you have experienced it, you cannot return to a life where your peace depends on someone else holding you together. The self you have discovered is not fragile. It is the strongest ground on which you will ever stand. In the end, the greatest freedom is recognizing that you are already whole. Protect this truth. Live by it. Never allow the world to convince you otherwise. If this message resonated, another video awaits on your screen, one that will take you even deeper into the journey of strength, wisdom, and self-discovery. Watch it next. And thank you for being a part of Stoic Sage Academy, where every step you take is a step toward becoming the person you were always meant to be.